Kudzu. Does anyone know what kudzu is? A few, bless you. Oh, okay, we got a few hands. Some of you guys might be learning about it in school. Kudzu first arrived in the United States in 1876. A year after America was founded, kudzu came up, and it was part of this festival that they were throwing, and countries from all over the world would come to this festival, and the country of Japan brought this beautiful ornamental plant that was a viney plant that kind of grew up around the trellises, and it was something that was amazing. Everyone loved it. They were in awe of its beauty. And so what happens whenever we like something? We want more of it, right? Everyone made this plant kind of their priority. They would plant it, and it was said to be beautiful, but also great for soil erosion, right? Because of its vines that would dig down deep into the soil, it was one of these plants that would help prevent all of the erosion that was taking place in the United States from the waterways and from all of the towns that they were building. And so what they did in the late 1800s is they brought it over and they made it a part of the United States. What they didn't count on is the impact that this plant would have. This plant, they found out, really enjoyed the weather, the warm weather, wet weather, right? And so it kind of took over in the South. There was this idea that this plant, this beautiful plant that was decorational, ornamental, but it was one of these things that they really, really enjoyed having, kind of began to take over. They say in perfect environment, it can grow up to 12 inches a night. And therefore, it got the name foot-a-night vine, right? It would grow up to a foot, and in the perfect weather of the South, it would continue to grow and grow and grow and take over. It is now known as the vine that ate the South. If you look at this next photo right here, this vine, if you're driving through the southern United States, you will see this vine all over, absolutely wreaking havoc on fields and plant life and trees. It grows up the trees. It covers cars. It covers houses. It covers everything it comes in contact with. Now you can see why it's known as the plant that ate the South. Every year, kudzu causes over $100 million in damages every year. It erodes foundations, and it grows up over top of things, and it takes so much work to be able to get rid of it. Another source goes beyond that and says that it's not just about the damage that it causes, but every year, kudzu causes the South about $300 million, not just in damages, but in lost productivity for what the land would be able to produce. And here's what they found out. It was labeled an invasive species, and it was put on the federal noxious weed list. But what they found out is that when a rapidly producing species arrives in hospitable environment, it can quickly and easily become invasive and harm the environment, which results in irreversible damage. This is a vine that absolutely wreaks havoc on everything that it comes in contact with in the South. So today we're going to look at a species that has its roots in our lives, that has its roots, and it can easily take over our lives. And we're going to be looking at the sin of greed, right? The sin of greed. Now, greed has a lot of cousins, a lot of nephews, relatives, a lot of things that are going on with envy and lust and gluttony. And greed is one of these cousins of sins that has a lot of cousins that Exodus talks about. The 10th commandment in Exodus chapter 20 is, thou shalt not covet. And then it goes on to list a lot of things that you shouldn't covet. Don't covet your neighbor's oxen. Don't a lot of different things that we can covet. And so today, if you needed the 10 commandments that's all you needed today was, hey, don't covet. You'd be like, all right, good, I'm out of here. You're more than welcome to leave at this point. But what we're going to do today is we're going to dive in just a little bit deeper to what greed is in our life and what we can do to guard against it. Growing up, I had a very clear picture of what greed was. It was this right here. It was Scrooge McDuck swimming in his basement of money, right? Just swimming in his gold while Donald and Huey, Dewey, and Louie sat there and looked in awe of all of the amazing, vast amount of wealth that he had. Who needed that much? What would he even do with more? He couldn't even spend what he has. And so for me, growing up, what I learned in church, what I learned in Sunday school, what I took from all of that was this guy is greedy, right? The guy who has excess wealth, right? Anything beyond what you need to survive is greed. Which, as I got older, I started to really question that a little bit. Anything beyond what I need to survive, really? So a vacation to Disney, is that greed? The job promotion, the bigger house, are all of those things greed? Just by having them, does that mean that I am greedy? Well, we're going to look a little bit closer at one of the things Jesus talks to us in Luke chapter 12 about. And in Luke chapter 12, Jesus is telling this story. There's a big crowd of people that's gathered together, and Jesus is talking about hypocrisy, and that's where we're going to pick up in in verse 13. Chapter 12, verse 13, and here's what it says. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, my brother divided the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kind of greed. Life doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions." And then Jesus told this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. That sounds good. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there is where I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." See, this farmer displays all of the classic signs of greed that Scrooge McDuck did, right? He's got this amazing crop that comes in, and what does he want? He's like, "Hey, how am I going to spend this? I don't even know." The farmer has a material and societal concept of success in order to be happy. And the essence of his being was rooted in the need for material gain. This is the classic signs of greed that we all have, right? That we all understand. What is greed? It's that selfish, excessive desire for the material. So how do we know if it's selfish or excessive? If you and I are sitting here today, how do we know if the things that we have, if the things that we want, if that's selfish or excessive in our life? Is walking into Costco, buying a Sam's Club membership excessive? Well, I mean, kind of, if you think about it. Is it selfish? How about the Disney vacations? How about all of these things that we have in our life? Are they selfish and excessive? He already has barns, but he wants the holy trinity of marketing. He wants bigger, newer, better barns, right? They're the things that he wants that are in excess to what's going on, because the more he has, the more he succeeds. If you and I were to go get coffee with this farmer from this parable, you might share some of the ancient wisdom of a philosopher known as the notorious B.I.G., Mo Money. Some of you are like, I don't even know what he's talking about right there. But we get the idea of more money, more problems, right? Why have more money? Because it's just going to come up with more problems. But that's not what Jesus said. That's not the way to make greed go away, is to just have less, right? Jesus didn't say any of that, but what he did do, and what I think is one of the most overlooked characters in this story, was the first part that I read. And I'd heard this parable so many times before I even recognized what was going on. Jesus is standing there preaching in front of thousands of people, preaching and teaching, sharing his word. The Messiah is standing here teaching his people, and you got a guy that comes up and says, "Hey, I got a question. Hey, I got a question for you." Someone in the crowd, a random Joe Schmo, steps up and says, "I got a question. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Out of the blue, he wants to change topics. The thing that Jesus is talking about, he wants his answer. Now, I'm not going to rag on this guy too hard. We've all watched interviews, whether it's political or sports or something going on where you have a question. You know that there's a bigger issue, and you just want that reporter to ask that question, and they're not asking the question. You've been there? You're like, come on, just ask this. This is what I want to know. And that is what this guy's doing. Jesus is sitting there talking about it, but this man feels like an injustice has been done, and he wants Jesus to answer this question. This guy was one of us. He felt cheated, unjustly treated, and wanted Jesus to give an answer to his question. Now, from his question, we can look at a few different things, and we know a few different things about him. First of all, what you need to know, what I needed to know, is that in those days, when a man would die, when a father would die, he would leave his inheritance, his possessions, his wealth, his money, his donkeys, everything that he had, it would be divided, right? It would be split up with however many sons he had. And in this case, let's just assume that there's two. And what would happen is that wouldn't be divided up evenly. What it would be done is it would be divided into thirds, and the oldest son would get 2/3 of everything. The oldest son would get a double portion of whatever was left over. So the oldest son got 2/3, and the younger son got 1/3, right? Doesn't seem to be really fair. Every material possession that the father owned was split up, but the older son got more, got way more. See, this man was interrupting Jesus because he wasn't the oldest son. He was the guy who got gypped. He was the guy who didn't have as much. He was the guy who was sitting there saying, if I could only have a little bit more. If you could only tell my older brother to divide the inheritance in half with me, to give me what I could be due, what I could have gotten, man, life would be a lot better. And by saying that, we know that he believed in the power of Jesus' words. He believed that if Jesus would just tell them to give me my stuff, I would be better. He would listen. I believe that Jesus could impact this. I believe that the Messiah's words would really impact the life of other people and make my life way better. So Jesus goes on to tell a story about a greedy man. And in verse 14, he said, Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist of an abundance of possessions." Then he tells the parable of the farmer. You see, both the farmer in Jesus' parable and the man interrupting Jesus both had a greed problem. What was the problem? It was the greed. It was the idea that what greed is. If we look at this, what is greed? Greed is an ungodly desire to acquire things that can catch on fire, right? It's that ungodly way where we say, this is mine, and it's the possessions of this world. What are the things that I can do? What are the things that I can get for myself? That it takes an ungodly way in order to get them. It takes an ungodly way to acquire the things that are finite in this world. There are two ways that we can do this primarily. And the first one is unrighteous acts in procuring possessions. When we take unrighteous acts in procuring possessions, this is ungodly. This is an ungodly way to get things, right? It's an ungodly way to get things. It's stealing from the gas station, hoping that the clerk doesn't recognize. But what happens whenever that clerk recognizes that we've stolen something from the gas station? It breaks community. It breaks trust. It breaks everything that God holds holy and sacred. It breaks our trust with God that we're not trusting Him for what He's going to give us, right? The second way is it's uncharitable omission in keeping possessions that you already have. It's the uncharitable omission in keeping our possessions. Both are ungodly ways and both break community. That uncharitable omission, it's when I secretly keep my wife's favorite ice cream in the garage refrigerator so I don't have to share any with her. What's going to happen when she finds out? Community will be broken. We'll just leave it at that, right? When we look at things and we say, these are the things that I'm going to keep just for me, it breaks community. hoarding what we already have. Whenever we see, and we can see this in a word picture, when we get things and we kind of tuck them away behind us, we tuck them away in a place where nobody else can see them. Why? Because we're keeping them for who? Keeping them for ourselves. This idea of greed that's not only just, I'm going to go out and take what's not mine because I want it. I'm going to go out and take what other people have because I want it. But it's this idea of the things that we do have, we're going to put it in between me and you so I can keep you at a distance because this is mine over here. This is the ungodly. This is the unrighteous. This is the uncharitable. These are things that do not please God. And so instead of looking at greed as situational, right? It's a situational problem, right? That's what the man in the story had, right? That's what the farmer had. That's what the guy who was interrupting. They were put in a situation where this greed began to fill them up, right? And I think a lot of times what we do is we look at greed as a situational problem. It's a geographical problem. If I was just in a different situation, I wouldn't have those feelings. But you see, I'd rather look at greed today as a geographical problem. What if we looked at greed as a geographical problem? And we look at it like this. Greed is a misorientation towards possessions. Greed is a misorientation towards possessions. We as people, we would have a misorientation about the possessions. The things, it's easy to become disoriented. Am I right? Have you ever been in a kudzu forest? Have you ever been in a place where the weeds are just so thick and just gathering around you and it's hard to know where you are because everything looks the exact same and everything looks like it's an obstacle standing between you and happiness or freedom, right? Whenever we start looking at that, we're going, oh my goodness, it's easy to become disoriented and you start walking in the wrong direction. And when we become disoriented with our possessions, things prioritize relationships. Promotions trump morals. Justification of unjustifiable actions. These are things that we start doing when our possessions take a place that they should not be taking in our life. Jesus wants us to be on guard against all kinds of greed because we live in a hospitable environment for greed to flourish. We live in a hospitable environment for it to run rampant and cause destruction in our life. The pleasures of this world are all around us on display, whether it's on social media or it's what other people have or just driving down the road, seeing all of the things that we have. It's a hospitable environment for this invasive species of greed to come into our life and to just start tearing everything apart. It becomes so difficult to actually get rid of. How are we supposed to operate a greed-free life when we are planted in a position where our environment, the abundance of our environment is so hospitable to it? Just like kudzu, man, it gets in there and it begins to take over. But Jesus talks about how it's not just that we should not have greed, it's we need to be on guard against greed. That word abundance, be careful. Life doesn't consist in the abundance of our possessions. That's not the only time it's used in a parable by Jesus. Jesus used that same word, abundance, in Matthew chapter 25. Some of you guys have heard the parable of Matthew 25 where a master goes away and he calls 3 of his servants in and he says, hey, servants, come here. And he gives one of them five bags of silver coins. And he gives another one 2 bags of silver coins. And he gives another one as 1 bag of silver coins. He says, I'm going to go away. And then he comes back to collect, and he comes back to talk to his servants, and he finds that the guy who had 5 bags, and what did he do? He worked and he doubled, and now he's got 10 bags of silver. Good job. That's awesome. Guy with 2 bags, what did you do? He's like, now I've got 4 bags. I doubled your investment. That's awesome. Good job. A guy with 1 bag comes up and says this in Matthew 25:24. Says this, then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. But look, here's your money back. And he hands him the 1 bag. And then in verse 28, the master says this, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. For those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. They will have an abundance. Now, I looked this up. What does it mean? It means to superabound. I love that. Like superabound. You're going to have a super lot of stuff, right? It's going to abound. What you have, your possessions are going to abound. And it's the same word here, the abundance of things and the abundance of things. See, if it was a matter of just removing ourselves from the environment where everything is built to build up greed, where the environment is perfect for greed to be able to flourish in our life, if it was just about giving everything away and not having anything and closing our eyes and saying, oh my goodness, we can't do this, why would he give us an abundance? It's not about the objects, but it's about the orientation we have to those objects. You see, what greed does is greed elevates the gift above the giver. Greed takes the gifts, the things that we've been given, and it puts it above the person who gave it to us. It puts the gift above the giver. And when we start craving and we start diving in and we start really owning this gift, this is mine, this gift, this beautiful thing, whether it's grain or whether it's the house that we've been given or whatever, the job that we have, when this becomes mine, now the gift, the thing that we have been given, usurps the giver for the top spot. And when that happens, we'll do anything to keep the gift. We're going to orient the gift away from everybody else so we can hold the gift to where one day the master's going to come back and be like, see the gift you gave me? I've got it and it's still the exact same. It's still here. When we allow our desire for the material to become perverted, greed takes root in our life and begins to destroy. This whole series is perfection perverted. So what is the perversion that's going on here? The perversion is with desire for material things because of what they can give us, because of what we like, because of our Amazon order history, right? These things that kind of come into our life to where, oh, this is the thing that is going to help. This gift is going to be what happens, but sometimes that pressure from the outside, like Greg was talking about in his message on pride, the popcorn illustration, sometimes what happens is the pressure from the outside becomes so great that it keeps us from exploding forward, and instead of having greed in our life, have the desire in our life for our possessions to be used for God. To have the desire for the things that we have in this world, our material possessions, to be used in a positive way as a way to honor God. My wife does this occasionally, and it's a problem. But she'll ask me a question every once in a while, and everyone looks over at her like, what did she do this time? She'll ask me a question occasionally that she should know the answer to, but she'll say, do you want popcorn? And my obvious response is, no, I don't want any popcorn. And then she'll come over with a bowl of popcorn and she'll sit there, and I'm sitting right here and she's going to sit right here, and she has the audacity to hold her popcorn on this side of her. And as I start to reach over, she's like, what are you doing? She's like, this isn't yours. I'm like, this is mine. I want this. Why not position it right in between us? She said, well, you didn't want any. And it's this idea that as we use our possessions in our life, as we're given control of possessions in our life, as we have been put in charge as stewards of the possessions in our life, what is our orientation to those possessions? Is that desire for material good giving you material goods? Is that your life existing because of it? Because Jesus said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. If we're going to be in a hospitable environment for greed to be able to dig its roots down into our life, we got to know how to be on guard for it. And luckily, Jesus tells us that right after this parable. In verse 32, he says this, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Can I get an amen? There's so much more that comes with the kingdom than just the possessions. There's title, there's authority, there's so much that comes with a kingdom that Jesus is ready to give each and every single one of us. And what we do is we often sit there and we just focus on the gift. We just focus on these one or two little things in our life. But he says this, sell your possessions and give it to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out. Why should we provide purses for ourselves that won't wear out? Because we're in constant use with them. The things that we get and we put in our purse, I don't know, I don't carry a purse, backpack, whatever you want to carry. But the things that we are given and we put them in our space, we understand that they are between us and God. We're going to keep them there because if he wants them, we're going to be giving them out. We're going to use our possessions not as something to build ourselves up, but use our possessions in a non-greedy way as a desire to build God's kingdom. We need to understand that the gifts that we have are celebrated because of the giver. And he goes on, provide for yourself purses that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. And then verse 34, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus wants us to have the same mindset that he did as a generous giver, as ready to give away the kingdom, as ready to give away the things that we are in possession of, to bring him honor and glory, to elevate the giver. He's ready to give us the kingdom. In Psalms 37, verse 4, it says this, trust in the Lord and do good. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Listen to this. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit everything you do to the Lord and trust him, and he will help you. As we live in this world, I'm going to go ahead and have the band come on up and get ready as we're going to close in another song. But as we sit here and we look at the things that we have, the answer to greed isn't to just get rid of all of your stuff. The answer to greed isn't just to go live a life and keep your head down to where you can't see all of the other stuff and I won't have any greed. That didn't work. The man who interrupted Jesus didn't have what he thought he should have had. The farmer, he kept his stuff away and uncharitably just kept what he had for himself. And as we start to wrestle with God, as we start to wrestle with our possessions, what is our orientation towards our possessions? Is it something that we're willing and able to give freely? Or is it something that we're hiding away? Is it something that we're so jealous of and so envious of that we go after? Or is it something that we back off and say, listen, God is going to provide. I've got a Father, I've got a giver up in heaven who's willing and ready to give me the kingdom because he has blessed me. He cares about me. But when we allow our possessions to usurp that top spot of the giver, that's when greed has kind of gotten a hold on our life. When that raise will fix everything. If we just get into that house or drive that car, it'll fix everything. It's going to fix it. By all accounts, the guy in the barns, he should have been happy. But he was accounting for the goods of this world, the gifts that the giver had given him to give him success in this world. Our possessions are not bad. You can't judge somebody's spirituality by how much or how little they have. But what you can do and what we can do for ourselves is to check where our orientation is with our possessions. Are we keeping them away from other people so no one else can get them, like the guy who buried his master's money? Or are we being good stewards of them with our open purse saying, yes, I've been given this and I want to give it back. I want to represent the giver in a great light. He has given me and he has entrusted me with things that I want to bless other people with. So in an environment that is ripe for greed to grow, in an environment where greed as an invasive species can come in and take over our life, they can take root in our life and not just destroy what we have, but to destroy all of the things that we could have in the future and do irreparable damage to our lives and the lives of others. How are we taking guard? How are we taking inventory of the things that God has given us in order to bless others, to bless those around us? So as we struggle with, as we're in an environment that struggles with greed, I want to implore you, I want to encourage you, and I think Scripture is encouraging us to be on guard against the way that we interact with our possessions. Are we treating our things, the things in our life, as in an open purse to just be able to love and hand out and be good stewards of those things? Or are we keeping them away from other people? Or are we going after things, oh man, if only God would give me this, everything would be better? We believe in his power. We believe in his power. Maybe if I pray hard enough, I'm going to get the things in this life that I deserve. I'm going to get the things in my life that'll make me happy. But so I want us to sit here, and instead of saying, hey, I've got this problem with the thing that I won't have. What if we, as a people, were ready to bless our world and just be able to give freely and be able to demonstrate, just as God did, I'm ready to give away the kingdom. I'm ready to give away all I have. I'm ready to give away who I am. And I'm not going to hold it back for one day when I say, God, remember the gift that you gave me? Here it is, intact. I've kept it. I've kept it all to myself. He wants us to have those open purses, those open backpacks, as we engage with people and we freely give away the gifts that we've been given to God, the possessions that we have, and we lovingly and carefully examine our hearts and say, what is the orientation that I have with the possessions in my life?